Hello, in this video I am going to be looking at, finally, the new tank in store, the Sentinelle. So I might be a bit late to this one, but I wanted to play the tank a bit before actually doing the review because Wargaming didn't give us this tank early on press accounts. We were only able to get it when the crates entered store. So this is the Sentinelle. It is a tier 8 French heavy tank with a bit of an odd autoloader gun, which is sort of similar to the M4 Yos, as in it has a very long intraclip reload, but it has a very fast magazine reload. But this one is a bit different in that it has higher alpha and longer intraclip with fewer shells. But I'll get right into its stats. So of course there is a review on my website if you do want to have that without the commentary. So here you can see its armor profile against 225mm of standard penetration, pretty normal for a tier 8 heavy tank. You can see the cupola of course is a weak point and the lower plate two typical usual weak points. You can also see that the driver's hatch is very slightly weak to standard ammo, but of course it's a fairly hard weak point to hit, and of course it is still mostly red. There are also a few other small areas, as you can see, on the edges of the turret, but most of the time these aren't going to be hit. You can also see turning the hull isn't that great in this tank. It does have this awkward hull shoulder, which is a weak point when side scraping, and your turret sides aren't the strongest, meaning that even if you turn the turret slightly, it will become penetrable. Now switching to premium ammo, you can see against 265 APCR, the hull shoulders when facing head-on are still fairly strong, but if you aren't using enhanced armor, they will be penetrable to premium ammo. You can also see the driver's hatch is now completely weak and very easy to go through. You can also see that the turret face does become slightly weaker, however it's still generally fairly strong, especially as this is premium ammo. And of course you can slightly turn the turret, as you can see in this right image. Of course don't turn it too far to the point where enemies can shoot the side. The main weaknesses on this tank of course are going to be the lower plate and the cupola, and the lower plate is very easily penetrable to HESH shells as it is only around 150mm thick. I'm slightly under the tank here just to show sort of the armor. So with this tank you do want to be using enhanced armor. As you can see here, this is 270mm of heat, which a lot of tier 8 tanks have. So you can see that despite it still being fairly strong and fairly easily able to block 270, as the turret face is just roughly 270, it does still have a roughly 50-50 chance to go through, just because it is on that point of thickness. But using enhanced armor does make the turret's front much stronger, up to around 280, which stops this 270mm of penetration from this heat round going through. So you do really want to be using enhanced armor on the Sentinelle. And very quickly looking at its side armor, you'll be able to see that it is actually quite strong, 90mm thick, with no sort of spaced armor covering it, and just this whole shoulder as a weak point. You can see the entire rear of the tank is just uniform, so there are no hidden weak points along its side. So here, looking at the armor when it's using its gun depression, it only has 7 degrees, but you can see that it is perfectly enough for the tank to be able to bounce all premium ammo. And the top image is 225 AP, the bottom image is 265. You can see the turret front is now only between 280 to 285, so most tier 8 tanks can't penetrate this at all. This tiny spot up here is the cupola. It's a very small weak point, but it is still hittable. But essentially, the Sentinelle's armor profile is pretty solid. It's not bad at all for a tier 8 heavy tank, and you'll still be able to bounce the majority of premium ammo on the turret, given that you use enhanced armor. So a very good armor profile in general. Next, moving to the gun, this tank mounts a 120mm autoloader. It has AP heat HE ammo with 220 penetration on AP, 260 on heat, and 68 on HE. The heat isn't super impressive, but it's not terrible either, and the HE is actually very good penetration, considering it's only a 120mm gun. Damage is 350, 300 and 440, which are fairly normal numbers for a tier 8 heavy tank, but for a 120mm gun they are slightly, well, a fair bit below average. There are 3 shells in the magazine with an 8-second intraclip, so it takes a total of 16 seconds, that's wrong, it takes 16 seconds to unload the full magazine, dealing 1050 damage, and the reload time of the entire magazine is 14.5. So overall, very quick reload. As you can see, 14.5 for such a gun is very fast, but very slow intraclip, which takes up more than half the reload of the entire magazine. Overall, the DPM is not terrible, but that number isn't really too relevant. What really is quite important is the DPM when unloading, just because when you are unloading your damage with that 8-second intraclip, it's more like you're shooting the gun of a regular cyclic tank, which has a more normal reload of around 6 to 10 seconds, which is sort of what this tank does. It's not like a regular autoloader where it just bursts out all the damage quickly. So in terms of gun handling, it's got horrible aim time of 4.7 or 5, horrible base aim time of 2.75, very good dispersion of 0.317, and horrible gun handling of 0.24, 0.24, 0.14. Other than this, it has 920 shell velocity with 800 on heat and HE, and the gun depression is 7 degrees. Not around the entire tank, this is just copy pasted from another review, I will edit that. So overall, this gun is okay, it's not great, it's got horrible gun handling and aim time, but it does slightly compensate with better, well, very good dispersion. But you can really still feel that horrible aim time in battle. It feels very derpy despite having great accuracy, just because you can't get aimed in very easily. On top of this, it has 8-second intraclip, which is very slow. Unlike the M4 Yo, which has a sort of similar gun system, this tank only has 3 shells in the magazine and its intraclip is an entire second longer. It does make the tank feel just very awkward a lot of the time, especially when you can't actually use that sort of faster reload with 8 seconds, and you have to sort of wait after you've already intraclipped that shell. But still, overall, not a bad gun. You will see it in battle. Next, mobility. In terms of speed, it's quite slow, 32 kilometers per hour. 15 reverse is good for a heavy tank. Its acceleration rate is 17, which is amazing for a heavy tank. And it has almost 900 horsepower for a 53-ton tank, which is very good for a heavy tank. The mobility on hard terrain is great at 17 horsepower per ton with good traverse speed of 35. On medium terrain, it's still great at 13 horsepower per ton with a decent 27 degrees traverse speed. So what you'll notice here is that it has great general mobility. It's got good traverse, decent on medium terrain, it's got great acceleration rates, but it hasn't really got anywhere to go with it, as 32 is a very limiting top speed. And you'll be able to see that in battle. This tank maintains a good average speed, but it doesn't get anywhere super fast, just because its top speed is fairly low. So it's a mobile heavy, it's not a fast heavy. Next, I'll get into the consumables and provisions. This tank does have access to tungsten shells, which I definitely recommend using because it does increase your alpha damage to 403 on average, which does make it very nice for trading damage, and it also increases your DPM while unloading to around, I believe it is 3000. But tungsten shells is just very good for killing those tanks which are sort of slightly above your regular alpha damage but below the tungsten damage. So 350 to 400 alpha, tungsten rounds will let you kill them in one shot. Next, of course, you need a repair kit just for general tank maintenance, and finally you want the small repair kit and not the speed boost, because again, your tank has a low top speed. Where are you going to go if you use the engine power boost? You aren't really getting anywhere that much faster. Next, provisions, just use a regular setup. If you feel that your modules get damaged, you can replace the small food with the protective kit. Now, moving to equipment. There are a few things you can do with equipment on this tank. So, firstly, calibrated shells. I personally would recommend this just because this tank isn't so much about having, well, great DPM, a fast reload, and all that, which Vents does help to make its reload quicker, does help to sort of increase its DPM slightly. But for this type of tank, it's not about that at all, because it's sort of limited by the terrible intro clip of 8 seconds, and there is nothing you can do to improve that. So I'm using calibrated shells to help me penetrate more enemy tanks, and helping to sort of minimize the need to use heat ammo, which decreases your damage. Of course, Vents is a fairly valid choice just because this tank has terrible aim time and really just horrible gun handling. Vents does actually help quite a bit with that. You can see reducing effective aim time by 0.2 seconds. That is significant. It does make a difference. And of course, all the other small stats do make a difference. But personally for me, I would use calibrated shells. Next, defense system, improved optics, because this is a heavy tank. I would use improved control just because this tank doesn't need better acceleration. Again, like I said, it has great engine power but a very limited top speed. Its traverse, while good, is also nothing super special, so I would just use improved control because it does help to maintain your speed when you do turn in general in battles. Next, don't use improved assembly. This tank has very low hit points at 1700, but using enhanced armor does just help you bounce so much more on the turret. It makes the turret so much more usable and reliable, especially against same tier enemies. And I will quickly show that. So here you'll see the difference between improved assembly and enhanced armor. You can see that when using enhanced armor against 265mm of APCR, the turret front is noticeably much more red and much harder to go through than when using improved assembly. You might think, oh, it doesn't make that much of a difference, but it does actually, because the turret is just barely on the level which tier 8 tanks sort of have the penetration to go through, as also shown here with the 270mm of heat penetration. You can see it does do quite a bit for the turret front, and it is very important to have. Bouncing just one shot with enhanced armor does make more of a difference than the 68 hit points of improved assembly. Next, gun lane drive, because this tank has just abysmal aim time, and while the shell velocities aren't anything super impressive, 920 is perfectly fine. Next, vertical stabilizer. This can work to improve the tank's horrible gun handling and effective aim time, and the tank already has amazing dispersion, so you'll still be very accurate. However, if you did want to min-max it and sort of just go all in with that dispersion, you can use refined gun and take it down to 0.269. So either of these can work. This is more down to your personal preference. Do you want to have it sort of balanced out with slightly better aim time, or just min-max it with the best possible dispersion? Next, toolbox for repair speed. And finally, consumable delivery system or high-end consumables. This is actually a very important choice on this tank. You'll notice tungsten shells has a 15-second duration. This tank, with an 8-second intro clip and 3 rounds in the magazine, takes 16 seconds to unload. So if you use consumable delivery system, you can only use tungsten shells for 2 out of 3 shells in the magazine. If you use high-end consumables, it increases the duration to 19.95 seconds, which allows you to use all 3 shells with tungsten. However, when are you actually going to get all 3 shells out within 20 seconds? A lot of the time it's going to be quite a pressed situation for that to be happening, such as if you're in a brawl or you're right on the front lines surrounded by enemies. A lot of the time, it will be perfectly fine to have tungsten on 2 of the 3 rounds in your magazine. But then again, there's an equal argument for having it on all 3, just in case, you don't have a shot for 10 or so seconds and you can get it out at the very end of your tungsten shell duration. But that choice is up to you for this tank. I will now show some gameplay of this tank which I had. So the first one is going to be on Faust against tier 9 enemies. Well, there's only 2 of them, but still they're tier 9. So in this battle I'm just going to go to the usual heavy tank flank, as the Sentinelle is a pretty regular heavy tank. Despite its weird gun system, sort of like the M4 as it has sort of adrenaline DPM of 2600 when unloading, it still plays like a regular heavy tank. It's got a pretty normal heavy tank armor profile with a strong turret and upper plate, and its mobility is pretty normal for a heavy tank, especially as, despite good mobility, your top speed is limited. So here you'll see actually quite an important part of this battle. I am going to be hiding behind this bush for basically the entire game, but here you'll see the horrible aim time of the tank, though the good dispersion does allow me to shoot the hatch of the TL7. Also in this battle I must point out I don't use tungsten often at all, definitely a mistake on my part, but yeah, that's just my bad. You should use tungsten as much as possible because it does increase your alpha damage to 400. But here you'll see I am side scraping against the Conqueror, and I am actually able to bounce his shots thanks to this tank having a very good 90mm of side armor. But a big aspect that is allowing me to do this is this bush in front of me. As you would have seen earlier, there is a side scraping weak point on this tank which is exposed, and this bush is helping to hide it. So here you see I do use tungsten on the ISU and I get a max roll of 438, which is quite nice. The ISU uses HE, which rightly so, he cannot penetrate me at that angle unless he shoots my turret front. So I'll show you in a moment sort of what the enemies are seeing from this tank as I am angling like this. Again, the Conqueror bounces off the side armor of this tank. And actually right there you can see the ISU did actually hit me on the weak point, the side scraping weak point of this tank, which is the whole shoulder. And I will now show you sort of what the enemies are seeing. So what's happening in this battle is, as I am behind cover and not aiming at the enemies, I am using the hull to bait. You can see there is no weak point that enemies can shoot in this left image. It's completely red and it is a very strong angle for this tank to have. However, when I reverse out to shoot enemies, the whole shoulder does become exposed, and that is the main weak point when side scraping. So you can hull bait and bounce, but then as soon as you come out to take a shot, you do have a weak point. And what's good right here is that I have a bush in front of me hiding that weak point, which is probably the main reason I'm able to bounce the Conqueror. But here you'll notice sort of this tank is just fine at being a regular heavy tank, holding a position and really just not doing all that much at the moment. But sometimes it is necessary for heavy tank gameplay to just hold, and you can see here there are 2 tier 9 heavy tanks in front. Now you'll see again going for the cupola with this tank's good accuracy, but unfortunately I don't know what happens to that shot. But you'll see with this tank that if you're not moving too much, you are actually pretty accurate and reliable in terms of gun handling. But the main problem is that you have bad aim time and bad on-movement handling, so when you do move and when you do have to stop to aim, that's where the problems sort of show themselves. Now with the TL7 pulling back, I'm going to use tungsten, and you can see 404 damage does just finish him off in one shot. And again with this Conqueror, 383 hit points, if I had gotten that shot out, probably would have killed him in one shot. So that's the good thing about tungsten. If the enemy has more than 350 hit points, you can just activate that and you'll most likely take them down if they're under 400. But that battle, 2800 damage and almost 2800 blocked, first class mastery and making 71,000 credits. So the next battle is going to be on Oasis Palms. This battle is going to be more sort of a brawl situation rather than sort of holding like the previous battle where I was using the tank's side armor to just hold that position behind the bush. But in this one I'm going to be going towards base A, as both of our teams are very heavy oriented and there's a lot of heavy tanks to be fighting, so most likely both teams will be going towards A. However, unfortunately, as you will see, the heavy tanks on my team do seem to want to be tank destroyers and sit in the bush watching over base C. So unfortunately I'm going to be the lone heavy tank on this flank. But you'll see here I was actually able to get into position relatively quickly. That's thanks to the tank's good mobility, and I was basically maxing my top speed the entire time driving into position. So you'll see now I am going to be pushing up with this SU, and I call for our heavy tanks to go as they are just camping there, which is not helpful. So they're 400 damage into the Tiger II thanks to tungsten shells. Very nice increase over the usual 350. And now I'm just waiting, looking for a shot on the enemy Tiger, and I do get another shot into the lower plate. So here you'll see one of the benefits of calibrated shells. I'm able to pen the lower plate of the Tiger II with standard ammo. Without having calibrated shells, I wouldn't have been able to go through the lower plate of the Tiger at that angle, and I would have just bounced off or had to use heat. But here you'll see the good accuracy of the Sentinelle. You can see that the aim time is very long, the gun handling is bad, but because I'm not moving too much, the accuracy of this tank is actually very good. You can also see there 8-second intraclip for 350 alpha does work out to be very good DPM, 2600. It's not fast for an autoloader, but the effective DPM level is still better than most tier 8 heavies. There you can see the bad gun handling as I turn to shoot the Tiger I. You do need to aim in a fair bit when you are moving on this tank, but the accuracy does help you to snap some shots in. Here you can see the good reload time of this tank does allow me to quickly put another shot into the Tiger I. Unfortunately though, I am now surrounded by tanks, so I'm just going to go for the damage as much as I can before I go down. And you can see here, this is only a 3-minute battle, 2-minute 46 seconds, but I did do a good amount of damage despite this tank only having 2100 DPM. So you can see there 3030 damage, 1150 blocked in only 3 minutes. Again, not making too many credits, I don't have a credit booster on. And finally, I have one more battle on Faust as well. This one is again showing more of the gun use, as I do a fair bit of damage in this battle. So once again, as this tank is sort of a regular heavy tank, I'm going to be going towards base C, especially as again we both teams have a fair few amount of heavies. So here you'll see sort of I'm going to be using the same position, but it won't work out quite the same as in the previous battle on Faust, just because these are, well, not every battle is the same. So here you'll see again the bush use does help me to sort of remain hidden from the enemy tanks, even against that T-28 prototype, which doesn't spot me until I shoot. But unfortunately you can see I was moving there, so the horrible gun handling of this tank makes me shoot that sort of container that was in front instead of the T-28. So unfortunate. And you can see here, that was the nice accuracy of the tank, allowing me to snap in a shot on the rear of the T-28 prototype. But you'll see the enemy team has actually mostly gone and flanked around towards base A, so I am going to be falling back to help out our T-28 defender as the enemies do push around behind us. So one thing you will notice about this tank, look at the hit points of the enemy T-54. He has 1924, I have 1700. One thing you do want to be really careful of in this tank is trading hit points or losing hit points too early in the battle, just because you don't have that many to play around with. 1700 is much less than the usual 1800, and some of the healthiest tier 8 heavies have 1950, so you do want to be quite careful about trading damage and losing your hit points too early on. But now you'll see I'm in a 1v2 against the Progetto and the T-54 on this flank. I am going to take 2 shots here, but you can see, despite my 8-second intro clip, I am still able to put in 2 shots into that Progetto. So he was a bit greedy getting out his full magazine. But again, 8-second intro clip, it's slow for an autoloader, but in terms of the actual DPM when you are doing that 8 seconds with 350 alpha, 2600 is actually very good for having 350 alpha. If you compare it to tanks like the Titan Strife, which has 340, that tank only has 2300 DPM. If you compare it to the Kyla, which has 350, that tank only has 2100 DPM. So when you are unloading the damage with 2600 on this 350 alpha, it is actually very good DPM. And now you'll see I'm down to a 2-shot for this T-50-42, so I'm going to try and get as much damage as possible before he inevitably takes me out. But you can see I do sort of crush a shot there. As I saw, the side of his turret was penetrable, but then he does turn and it bounces. Bit of a bad shot by me, but you can see here I do manage to get the damage anyway. Almost 400 into his lower plate, and then he does put another shot into me, taking me down to a 1-shot, but then I will get the last one into him, another 400. So you can see the benefit of having that tungsten. Doing 400 on 2 shots is very significant for a tier 8 heavy tank in 8 seconds of intro clip. It does also boost your DPM output to around 3000, I believe, because 8 seconds with 400, that's a lot of damage. But in that battle, I didn't bounce nearly as much, just because I was sort of running around, being a bit more mobile, trying to defend that base C area. Did only bounce 1 from the Progetto 46, but 3400 damage almost, and making 95,000 credits. So, this tank, the Sentinelle, is it worth getting? I would say no, because it sort of takes the most awkward, weird aspects of the IS-3 Defender and the M4 Yo, and it combines them into one tank. It's got the very low 1700 hit points of the IS-3 Defender. It's got the weird sort of intra-clip, well, long intra-clip fast reload mechanic of the M4 Yo, but it's just not on as good of a platform, and it hasn't got as many shells or as fast of an intra-clip, which just makes it much more awkward to use. The reason being, the Yo is sort of a sleeper OP tank if you can use that adrenaline autoloader DPM correctly. It's got 1850 base hit points, which is a whole 150 more than the Sentinelle. It's got 8 degrees of gun depression, it's got much more reliable hull front and turret front armor, it can side scrape, well, roughly the same effectiveness as the Sentinelle, but a big difference is it has just much better top speed, which allows it to be a much more sort of flexible tank in battle. And of course, don't forget, 7-second intro clip compared to 8 seconds does still make quite of a big difference. And then the Yo, of course, also just has much better gun handling on its gun. So if you did want this sort of funny gimmick of the weird autoloader, I would say go for the M4 Yo. If you want to do sort of big alpha damage with a decent sort of intro clip, I would say go for the IS-3 Defender. The Sentinelle does have a place, but it's just sort of an awkward and weird combination of these two other tanks. It's not a bad tank by any means, in fact it's pretty decent I would say, but it's just sort of weird and somewhat pointless compared to these other two. But if you do want to have that sort of interesting gun on this still very good tank in terms of its mobility and armor, I would say the Sentinelle is not a bad choice at all. Of course, don't gamble in crates, it's absolutely not worth it. These crates are also pretty expensive. This tank is nothing too special, nothing to lose your mind over. But yeah, if it does come back for gold in the future, you could definitely consider it, but I would personally still say IS-3 Defender or M4 Yo if you want the alpha, or if you want the funny gun mechanic with just a really good tank platform. Sentinelle, a bit of an awkward combination. But yeah, that is it for this video. Thanks for watching.